Good morning. So today we are going to talk more about what if we can't factor? What do we do? Well, it's something called the quadratic formula. And this formula works even if you can factor. So if you're like, "Ooh, miss, factoring isn't for me," you can also use the quadratic formula and it can tell you your zeros. So the quadratic formula is if you have your standard form, so your ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, so that's a big thing, it has to be equal 0, then this is the quadratic formula. It's x equals, and this is a long thing, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So I'm going to play a really annoying song for you like 20 times, so we'll be able to remember this. So that's how you find the x's. So your zeros is by using this quadratic formula. So let's see an example. Say we have x squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0. You might be like, "Hey, miss, I can factor that," which is totally correct. But we're going to also see if we can figure it out using this formula. So like we were practicing earlier, when we learned our vertex, we need to solve by finding what is our A, what is our B, and what is our C, because we're going to plug those into our formula. Our A is always what's in front of our x squared. So in this case, our A is 1. Our B is whatever term is in front of our x. So in this case, it's 6. And our C is that term that's alone. And in this case, it's an 8. So now what we want to do is the first step is to identify our A, B, and C. Our next step is to actually plug into our formula. So I have x equals negative, my b is 6, so instead of putting the b, I'm going to put 6, plus or minus the square root, and again I have b squared, so I have 6 squared, minus 4 times a, my a is 1, times c, and my c is 8. So that's the very top, and notice how I kept making the square root go longer? You want your square root to be over all of this part. And then you want the entire top to be divided by 2 times your a. And my a here is 1. So this is a whole lot of math we're going to have to do. So we're going to break it down and do it a little bit at a time to make it easier. So I know a negative times a positive will give me a negative. So I have negative 6. This plus or minus stays the same. And then we're going into the square root. I can do 6 squared. 6 times 6 will give me 36. And then I have this next part. I have minus 4 times 1 times 8. And when I put that into my calculator, I would get a minus 32. You want to be very careful if you have other negatives that you include the negative from the minus 4, because that will change if you're adding or subtracting here. And then it's all over 2 times 1, which is 2. So I just got from a very complicated looking thing to still complicated, but a less complicated thing. So let's reduce even more. So negative 6, can't do anything to that, plus or minus. I have 2 numbers inside of my square root that are subtracting. So I can simplify. 36 minus 32 would give me 4. all over 2. I can still simplify because I can find what is the square root of 4. So I have x equals -6. The square root of 4 is 2. So plus or minus 2 all over 2. Now you might be like, Miss, okay, what the heck is this plus or minus? This is saying that you can have 2 different answers. And you get one of those answers when you add the top, and you get the second answer when you subtract the top. So I'm going to split into 2 different equations now. So once you're fully simplified down here and you're like, okay, I can do nothing else, you want to split it up. The first one, I'm going to have that -6 plus 2 divided by 2. The other one, I'm going to have -6 minus 2 divided by 2. I can simplify right here. I know -6 plus 2 would give me -4 divided by 2, which is -2. -6 minus 2 is -8 over 2, which would give me -4. If you're like, Miss, can I just put this all in my calculator? You can, but you have to be super, super careful to make sure the numerator is all in parentheses, or else your calculator will do some weird stuff. So when you simplify, we got 2 different answers. We got -4 divided by 2, which is -2, and -8 divided by 2, which is -4. And those are our 2 zeros. You can check it by factoring and solving that way, but that's why we got these zeros. The reason this is super helpful is let's do one more problem. So for example, say we had 3x squared plus 5x plus 1 equals 0. We can't factor that, so we have to use our quadratic formula. So again, remember your first step is to identify your A, your B, and your C. In this case, my A is 3, my B is 5, and my C is 1. My next step, now I want to plug it into this formula. The formula never changes. So once you identify this and plug it in, it's a lot of calculator work, a lot of plug and chug. So we have x equals -b, so -5, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 5 squared, minus 4 times a times c. My a is 3, my c is 1. All divided by 2 times a, and my a is 3. So I'm going to skip some steps and not show it as in-depth as up here because I want us to have a lot of time to practice this. So our next thing we want to do is we have x equals -5 plus or minus. I got 25 minus 12 in here, which would give me 13 all over 6. Now you're like, okay, I can't do the square root of 13. So unlike this one where you took the step to take the square root, you're going to split it up because we can't actually reduce it anymore yet. So I'm going to split it up. Remember, you have -5. The first one is when you add it. So I have plus the square root of 13 over 6. And your second side is -5 minus the square root of 13 over 6. Now, we don't want to leave it like that. What we're going to do is we're going to plug it in our calculator. So you have to use your Desmos calculator because that's how I'll be able to see, did you plug stuff in correctly? So as I was saying before, my entire top is going to be in parentheses. So I had -5 plus my square root button is right here, the square root of 13. And notice if I put my parenthesis now, it's going to be inside the square root. Make sure you're pressing the right arrow key to make the parenthesis on the outside of that square root. divided by 6. And that gives me my first x value. So you would have x equals negative 0.23. You only have to do 2 decimal places. Now I want to do the same thing with subtraction. So negative 5 minus the square root of 13 divided by 6. And that would give me x equals negative 1.43. So those are my 2 x values. So the way you would write them is like you were before. You just have x equals, and you would write your 2 numbers. So we're going to do a whole bunch of calculator practice because this stuff is tricky. So make sure you have to use your Desmos calculator because it'll be easier to see what you're working on. So make sure you're asking questions. You got this. Let's go.